We are CampaignForce. This is the Veterans in Politics podcast. Let's introduce you to our guest.
This episode features veteran in politics Stuart Anderson MP. Growing up in a military family and then joining the army at a young age, Stuart talks about a tragic accident where he got shot, his subsequent physical and mental recovery, and how this has motivated him through life. This podcast episode is high on inspiration value, and we recommend you find his maiden speech on YouTube, where he details this experience. We also reveal how our host, Jonny, first met Stuart in a lift before he became an MP, and where he gave a literal elevator pitch. It's time for you to listen to the conversation.
Right, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Stuart Anderson, who is one of the latest crop from the 2019 intake. Stuart joins the 49 members of Parliament with a military background, which we'll discuss a little bit later on in the questions, and is a former Royal Green Jacket, quite proud rifleman. And for those of you that haven't already, I'd suggest you spend a good 10 minutes or so familiarising yourself with his maiden speech, which personally touched me quite considerably, and it's worth a watch. And we'll, again, might dive into that a little bit later on. But new into Parliament, a new fresh voice from the Armed Forces community, and we are absolutely delighted to welcome him today. So Stuart, without further ado, if you just want a couple of minutes, just say hi to the gang, and then we'll crack on with some questions.
Thank you, Jonny. Thank you for setting this up. We're looking to inspire people into Parliament. It's things like this straight after election, not as you build up to election, that builds the foundation and gets people involved. And I'll talk later on some of the things where I didn't think it was possible to do what I've done, just because I'd seen so few people. I didn't know where to look or where to turn. So brilliant, credit to you for setting this up and for getting Jonny on. And I'll really spread the word. There's a few others that we can get on moving forward. So if I talk broadly about my experience and how I got to where I am, and then when we drill down later, we can start looking at why I did things and that. So straight from school, joined the Green Jackets. 2 days before my 18th birthday, I was shot in Senny Bridge, live firing section attack. And basically you now keep your working parts to the rear because of me. Lull in battle, cook off. My friend shot me in the foot. Told I'd lose my leg, went through a whole traumatic thing of 10 months learning. My leg was saved, learning to walk again, learning to run, and then back to active service. All through that process, I dealt with physical rehabilitation. It was 1994 when I got shot. There was very little inside. There was absolutely none of how you're doing. It was suck it up or we'll take your leg off. That was the sort of pastoral support I would have had from the army. So really impacted me. I had quite major post-traumatic stress, but it was hidden because at the time, if you said you ever had an issue, it just wasn't done. And I had a career ahead of me I wanted to go and pursue. So within a year of being shot, I was on my first operation tour in Northern Ireland. Did Bosnia, did Kosovo at the earliest stages. Went and did SAS selection and decided it wasn't for me in the jungle. I was the youngest Lance Jack in the Green Jackets at the time. So I had a promising career, but I was 25 when I came out of the army. I didn't feel that it was for me at that time, and I was struggling with a few other issues. So I went into protection and had a very promising and very successful career in close protection. I've worked in 50 countries, protected the Prime Minister for a year. I was on a diplomatic protection team, done a whole host of things, and I formed a business providing security and defence training for, I think it was about 6 years during the War on Terror. I had quite a sensitive government contract where we provided Five Eyes training, what was straight out of Hereford. So I had 27 lads from Hereford came and worked direct for me, and we had a government contract to provide that training because manpower was so strapped. All our troops were on operational deployment in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I did that. When the War on Terror ended, I was given a month's notice to pretty much lose a business, come crashing down. So I went from what was a paper millionaire to having food parcels within a matter of a month. that was quite a humbling experience. And I built everything up, and we'll talk about the different ranks. To do what I was doing as what was a Lance Jack from the Green Jackets was unusual. I was in an SF community where most of them were WO1s or officers. So to fit in there and build some amazing relationships with those that still continue, I was able to prove my worth. It wasn't on about what I had done, it was what I could do. Then set up a business providing travel safety. You know, I sat down and thought, lost everything. I can moan about it, dust myself off, or crack back on. And that's what I did within a week. Set up a business that has gone on and still being successful now, although I've stepped out of that business. They're still running that, providing technology to use travel safe to help assess risk for people around the world for a lot of major corporations. So I did that. All from 2016 was when I first joined a political party. And 2019, I've become an MP. I can drill down to that in a bit, but now I'm in Parliament. I'm on the Defence Select Committee in what could be seen as a very different career and approach, but actually I'm building on a lot of what I've done many years before, but in a slightly different environment. So that's a whirlwind of where what I've done and where I got to during that time. And I know Jonny's prepared some nice questions, and I'm sure that you'll be firing them over in a bit to drill down into that a bit more as we go on.
I mean, that's an absolute amazing story, and not just inspirational for the armed forces community, but inspirational for all of our community across the UK. And I think it's a story we need to tell, and hopefully we'll see unfold in the current term of Parliament. And it's certainly, as I said, something I can really identify with. I also had 4 operations on my foot and leg, nearly losing it last year in a motorcycle accident. So hearing you speak, it really resonated with me, and learning to walk again. And it was just uncanny. And when you agreed to come onto this show, I was just over the moon, because your story certainly inspired me in the last year. And it's really generous of you to share it with us today. But as I said, we have got some warm-up questions. So here we go for the warm-up stretches, if we may. But I guess some of it will come out in the opening gambit. And I know you grew up around the SF community because your dad, I believe, served with UK Special Forces. Why on earth, with all of that and all that adversity and all those challenges, why on earth did you become an MP? What made you in such a short space of time?
My wife keeps asking me this. So I never knew anything about politics, I'll be honest. So when I went to Northern Ireland, I never knew any of the political situation. You're told, stop those people going down that street. This side wants to shoot you, that side just wants to fight you. It was, I wasn't bothered. I wasn't interested. I tell you, one of the biggest things that stuck with me was when I was in Kosovo. It wasn't what you've seen or what you've done. If I backtrack Bosnia, I remember giving out aid in Bosnia to the head man in the village who had a mansion, and everybody else lived in poverty. And I was like, let's just bypass him and give it to everybody else who's got nothing. He's obviously keeping it. And they went, well, you can't, because he'll kill them. And I was like, okay, it was an odd system, but it stuck with me not till many years later. I remember in Kosovo, when we went to Pristina, it was relatively clean. When we left 6 months later, I went in 99, when we left 6 months later, it was a tip, because there was no local government. People would throw their rubbish on the street. There was no one to clear it up and pick it up. And I thought, imagine what we take for granted. You catch someone for murder there, and then you just put them back out in the street. There's no jail system. It was quite hard to comprehend. So very respectful for what we had here. I was in Iraq in 2003, 2004, working for the US government then. And it was quite surprising to look at what had gone on, to see how a dictator had run the country. All those sat in the back of my mind. And it was 9 years before 2016 when I first thought, could I do that? Would I want to do that? The would I want to do it was no, not really. Could I do it? I still felt no, not really. And it seemed a wild dream that wouldn't go away. And it kept gnawing at me. Took me
That's
9 years to
why you're
tell.
the best man to do the job, because you didn't want to do it. If I'm quite honest, met plenty of people that have really wanted to do it, which is probably why you're here now.
It took me 9 years to tell my wife. I then told her, and we talked about it for a long time, because I didn't even have a social media profile. Nobody knew what I did.
Child for the last couple of weeks. It's just saying.
And I thought, are we prepared to do this? And we thought, okay. And then I bought a book, Politics for Dummies. And I literally typed in a search engine, how to become an MP. I knew nothing about the parties. I voted in 2015. I thought, oh, yeah, I might as well. I voted Conservative just because I was in Hereford. You didn't vote for Labour. There was no one really else running. So I thought, I'll go with that. And I didn't know anything about the parties. But from there, I thought, okay, I've said this, I'm going to push the door. Very quickly, I was involved in the association, and I started seeing if you had a bit about you and you was prepared to put the work in, there was places you could go. But it was a very weird setup. I remember I went and helped a bloke, Andy Atkinson, who was standing in Wrexham. I stood on a door, and this was my first week, and I was going to deliver leaflets, and I stood there, looked at myself, and I was like, I'm that geek who's going to knock on someone's door saying, vote for me, vote for this person. I'd always ridiculed people like that all my life. And there's me stood there, and I thought, I almost walked off and said, just forget it there and then. But I did it. And I love speaking to people, actually talking to one, because I didn't have the depth of knowledge. But I started speaking to people. I enjoyed it. I became a councillor in Hereford. It was on the by-election, and it was the one next to the camp. We played very big. I was an ex-soldier. Hereford really liked that. And I won a seat that had never been won before. There was a veteran who served in the Gulf War, and he had breathing problems. He was in a bad way. Top floor flat, should never been there. We got him moved into another area because he just never thought that the system would work for him. I remember him calling me in tears, saying, "You've done for me what nobody has ever done." The logistics of the process was quite a simple thing to do. But then I realised I could make an impact on people's lives. So I thought, right, I'm going to see if I can go all the way. And then started going in to help change people's lives, and to be, how to say, a genuine person, regardless of, and probably talk about media and things like how they can portray you. There's some very genuine people in Parliament. There's some people who are playing the game. I could think of better things to do than play the game. So I want to be in there where if I say something, people go, I might not like it, but I know he's going to do that. Not for turning, so to speak. I've got to see how that pans out, because there's a lot more factors coming in. But that's sort of the journey.
Sorry to cut across. That's quite the apprenticeship on the door, knocking on doors of the Hereford. That's certainly not a place to piss off people when knocking on doors. That's all I can say. But you clearly have got you're passionate about the bit out there in the community, and you've done that apprenticeship, as I've sort of alluded to. But what about the bit down in London? What's Westminster really like? And what was it like on that first day? Is it like, people have said it's like Hogwarts? Did you sort of wander around scratching your head? What do I do? What's it like there?
Before we allow Stuart to answer that question, if you're getting value from this podcast, then please hit subscribe now, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future episodes. Thank you. Back over to Stuart.
It's not like what everyone thinks. So I thought I was really clued up because I was listening to this podcast, reading that book, getting there. And then I got there and I went, well, this is very different. So to start with, I've built some very good relationships across all parties. It's not that side versus this side. You see that in the chamber, yeah. The chamber is a very daunting place, and it's very hard because it's like being a new rifleman just past the depot speaking against an RSM. There's some seasoned boys there, and you've got to treat it with respect. It's a very nervous place. All the decisions are made in the tea rooms and the corridors around that, I believe, and it's quite a well-oiled machine how things work. It's a surreal place as well. But what I found there is the two things that stood out to me was influence and access. So as an MP, I can pretty much get an appointment with anybody I want. Eddie Hughes, he's actually my whip, said you can have get the CEO of Boeing for a meeting if you wanted. So I don't want to. He said no, but you could. A week later, I had someone very senior in one of the aerospace. I'd love to take you for dinner. I was like, what? When I was trying to work, I could never get a meeting with any of these people, let alone lower down, because they understand the access that you have, the influence. I could see the Prime Minister every week. I'd see him, and he's like, "How's Wolverhampton? It's good. I've got a bit of a problem with this." Sajid Javid, I got on very well with him while he was Chancellor. He'd be in the tea room. Gavin Williamson, I have breakfast with most mornings. It's not just me; it's that group there. And I'd say, "I'm looking at this with the school." And so before you would try and access these people or get them on board, you get to speak to them day to day. Or at least weekly, you'd have access to all these people. And if you use that well, you can make things happen within Wolverhampton. Or like with Rishi, I was mentioned in the budget about the 10 million for veterans' mental health. That came on the back of my maiden speech and me hammering his PPS. I'm like, you've got to do this. You've got to do this. But not in a bad way. We build a relationship and they start to do that. I'm still learning. We've got a lot to learn because it's like running two jobs. So Wolverhampton, being a good constituency MP is key, and being a good parliamentarian is good. So you almost run two different jobs, and they're quite different from the two.
Yeah, absolutely. And having worked with a few of these characters over the years, my last MP, Grant Shapps, when I was his agent for a couple of years, 2.5 years, he never lost that touch of being a really good constituency MP, even when he was chairman and minister and secretary of state. He really, that's his main effort. And you've just mentioned, and you even get to talk to CampaignForce as well as the CEO of Boeing. And
there we go.
There we go.
Interestingly, I pretty much turn most people down. I'm not meaning you get inundated with, will you talk to this, will you do that? And it's about now selecting what I think is worth of my time, because you get 500 to 1,000 emails a day that the team manage. 100 of them will be invites to different things to come on, and you've got to look at where do you use your time, because each one of these takes me away from either being a good parliamentarian, good constituency MP. I don't do any national media. You get asked every week. I will do that later. I need to build a bit of a foundation. They quite easily trip you up.
Great approach. And if we can help with that, any of those veterans that contact you that want to look at politics, do send them our way, because we certainly do other veterans in politics. But you've already touched on it, your maiden speech, and that's where I know we met very briefly in a lift. I literally did an elevator pitch to you, I think, wasn't that right?
Yeah. I was a candidate then.
Before you were an MP, so yeah, talent spoiled straight away. But coming to that maiden speech, that's where you really, for me, as I said, connected to me, having watched that, fairly recently. I mean, what was you spoke very openly and from the heart. What was going through your mind in the build-up to that maiden speech? You obviously knew what you were going to say, but actually saying it at the time, how did you get through that?
It was a bit of a fight with myself, to be honest, because I wanted to stand up there and say, Wolverhampton's great, thank you for this, I'm looking forward to going to that restaurant and speaking with these people, and I'll be a good MP. That's what I wanted to do. To get up and share that I turned to alcoholism, to suffering with mental health, was not something I wanted to do. But I thought I'd been given a platform and I would be short selling myself and pretty much the veteran community if I didn't get out and do it. Now, there's a lot of wisdom that I was learning. As Steve Baker, on a chance meeting, someone said, yeah, Stuart's got quite an interesting story. He said, let me have half an hour of your time. I shared a lot of story with him. He said, I came in here to tell you not to share your story because you'll get burnt. He said, I've heard it. He said, you need to share it. And I worked with Steve over that week. And what stuff that I was saying, yeah, I used to get smashed, and they're like, he said, you can't use the word smashed, So he said, look, this is a TV studio. Everything you say is on camera, and it's going to be distorted. So I was like, okay. I was very nervous, but once I got it in my head that I had to deliver this, and if that was my political career over, or if I was in the naughty box, whatever it is, so be it. I was going to be authentic. I was numb for about an hour after, and my wife, she was watching it with her baby at home, and there was a picture of her, like, because she didn't know how much I shared. I'd written it out, I'd rehearsed it, and I struggled to get through it each time because it was very real. And it's the start. There'll be more things that I'll discuss in my life at a later date, but you've got to do it, I think, from a position of strength. And that was enough for people, I think, to believe I've been through it. I'm here to make a difference, because you can say words, but over time, only history will judge if my actions actually deliver on this. So for me, it was one I didn't want to do. I'm glad I did, because it put a very clear marker in. And I saw a difference, actually, which can be quite shallow, how people greeted me in Parliament and how they said I wasn't just one of the 109 that had just come, or 107 that just come through the door in the party. I was actually, that bloke's got a bit of real experience. Yeah. And we need that in Parliament.
No, and I think that authenticity, how you let your guard down and shared just enough, but as I say, not too much, it really came across as connected. And for those of you that are interested in the speech, Art from our team has put it in the chat box for you to copy and paste and view at your pleasure and leisure. You mentioned Steve Baker there, who's obviously ex-RAF, he joined recently by Darren Henry, another RAF veteran. But are there any people in politics that have served as a bit of a mentor to you? Or if not, is there someone that's really inspired you and doesn't necessarily have to be a veteran?
I liked Jonny's approach to politics. He seemed to, from what I saw, he seemed to be very real and firing from the hip, particularly as a backbencher. And Jonny, I've spoken at length with Jonny, he's a good friend. He would tell you a lot of the things he probably did, wind him back. He wouldn't do that. One of the MPs that, like, Eddie Hughes is my whip, never served. He's a man of integrity, and I'm learning and watching from him. Leo Doherty from the Whip's office as well, former Colonel Scots Guards, a lot of time for him. He's a straight talking, no messing person. Yeah, I see Leo, get on well with him, and those two I tend to go and, I'm looking to do this in the chamber. What would it be? And Leo was the one. I said, look, I wanted to do my maiden speech on defence questions. And he said, you can't do it on defence questions. It's a question. You've got to do it on a debate. He said, global Britain, the British Army, best exporter we got. Do it then. So I was like, okay. So he set me up for the win just on that bit of info. I don't suppose I had real mentors within that. If I look through history, Churchill, I think, was amazing. Margaret Thatcher. You even look at Labour, Clement Attlee with the NHS. There's a lot of, I admire anyone who's stood up and gone and done it. There was one that's quite unusual that inspired me at the time. So Theresa May in 2016, I think when she became Prime Minister, stood in front of the Downing Street and said, we will let your talent take you as far as you want it to go. So it was on meritocracy. I wasn't from a privileged background. I didn't go to a posh school. I wasn't an officer. That to me said, you as a former Lance Jack from a normal background can go and do this. And that really gave me a push at the right time. I'm not condoning everything she did as Prime Minister. And actually, I was vocal on some of the things I really disagreed with. I will say she has also earned my respect coming back as a backbencher, and the 1922 applauded her of how she supported Boris in the general election. And she's actually, it's quite weird walking past her going, hi, Theresa. Yeah, I can't get my head around that bit. But she brings a wealth of knowledge, and she's put that back in, and I've got to respect her for that. Even if I didn't agree with other things there that she did, that I think most people say, yeah, hats off to you.
And you mentioned that as a Lance Jack. I mean, our research, and after 2019, we published some research that revealed about 49 members of Parliament have a military background. So that's about 7% of Parliament. So we're really well represented. However, in that research, just a third are from the other ranks, with 2/3 being officers. Why do you think that is? And what can we do to inspire more from other ranks to stand up and serve again?
Okay, I think we need to cross the chasm. The chasm is too big from, I was a rifleman, private, sergeant, whatever it was, in whatever regiment, and these people are politicians. The country sees MPs in a different light to probably how we would see ourselves. They look, oh, it's the privilege. And I watched on PMQs, or one of the questions I went, and this politician came on who I know, and I thought, he just sounds like a Tory. How he came across it made it for me. I didn't go to this. I didn't go to Eton. So how can I be an MP? Things like this, we need to bridge that gap. But blokes need to step up, and ladies need to step up to the plate. Former soldiers need to go, you know what, I'm going to do this. But we can do a lot by bridging that gap and getting people to see it is a reality. That it's hard graft. I put everything on the line in the final stages to be an MP. You end up going down a route, and then you're getting to, it's about, I become a candidate. I moved to Wolverhampton with my family, our wife and 5 kids, one's studying, the rest are still at home. We moved schools to a seat held by Labour, of which the polls had me as losing. But I was like, I'm going to do it. And come election night, if I'd have lost, I couldn't have done any more. Nobody had shortchanged me. The hand I had, I played it to the best of my ability. I put a great team around me, and we fought, and we went out hard. We did it in a different way. But at the end of it, I'd had to step back from being a CEO of a company. I moved my wife and kids to from Hereford. We'd never moved before. I was always unaccompanied in the army. And we put the kids in the school, and I won by 1,600 votes. And I believe a lot of that, the decisions that I made to get there, like, people said, I'm going to vote for you. You're local. I'd only been there a year. So that had made a big difference, but I had to put everything all in to do it. And stand up at the night. If I'd lost, I couldn't have done any more. There was no one to blame. And I wouldn't have regretted it, although I was glad I won.
Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.